Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the greatest games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me is Jonathan Wilson, and with us is David Jones, presenter of Super Sunday and Monday Night Football on Sky Sports. David was formerly on the board at Oxford United, but is currently on the board at Sunderland. David, pleasure to have you on the pod.
It's lovely to be here. I feel I'm in great awe in this kind of podcast celebrity world that I'm in with not just the great Jonathan Wilson, but also you, Marcus. I'm humbled.
Oh, you're far too kind. David, what I'm pleased about is that for the first time, I think, ever on this podcast, I'm the one who's mentioned Sunderland first, rather than Jonathan.
before either of us, which is quite a strange thing, really.
Well, the last time we did a show together was, I think it was Chris Powell and John Collins were on with us. And I remember we bored the shit out of them for about half an hour before we actually went on, talking about Sunderland 1, Southampton 1 from October 1982, which by coincidence was the first game either of us ever went to.
My goodness.
Isn't that bizarre? Isn't that just bizarre? And if memory serves well, Jonathan, we got a free ticket from the manager, obviously because my dad knew the manager at the time, and I sat in the director's box. And you got a free ticket because you bunked in. Is that right?
The thing my dad used to do was 20 minutes to go, when they opened the gates to let people out, you just go and hang around. So I missed Ali McCoist giving Sunderland the lead with what he would call an overhead kick, a sort of hook from about 6 yards. But I saw Steve Williams' equaliser, which is pretty much the way it's been ever since.
Yeah,
I don't think I saw either goal. I was just too busy looking at the crowd, sort of, wow, all these people making lots of noise. That was pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, well, we should say that we aren't doing a Sunderland game, as you mentioned there, David, and we're certainly not doing that one, because today we're going back to an FA Cup semi-final in April 1997 at Old Trafford that finished Chesterfield 3, Middlesbrough 3. A great game, David. Why have you chosen this one?
It feels a bit random, doesn't it? Given that it's A, such a long time ago, B, it doesn't involve Sunderland, and it's C, not a game that I covered with Sky. I think when I had a little look back at some of the games that you'd done, and I did very much enjoy a podcast or an episode that you did on Sunderland, on Sunderland 4, Chelsea 1, which I would have to say would probably be, it was probably one of my peaks as a Sunderland fan. So that was gone. So where else did I look for a Sunderland game? And the next obvious one would have been Sunderland 4, West Ham 3, which Jonathan will remember as the Kieran Brady game, which I went to as a 14-year-old, I think I was. I stood in the Roker end for that one. But then I thought, well, I could do a Sky game. And the problem I have with that is I've been doing live games for Sky for probably more than 10 years, and they all just blur, and there's just a haze where sort of work is involved. And then suddenly this one came as a bolt from the blue as one of the first big occasions I probably ever went to. Although I did go to the FA Cup semi-final in 1992 at Hillsborough, Sunderland beating Norwich 1-0. This was a bit of an amazing game, wasn't it? In terms of FA Cup history, in terms of Chesterfield's history and Middlesbrough's, and for me it's sort of so fresh in my mind in so many ways, because it was the first big game that I'd been working on really as a reporter, and I should sort of add that I was at the Derbyshire Times in Chesterfield at the time. I was a news reporter, so I had really nothing to do with the sports department at all. But when this FA Cup run started to build, we had this one lovely guy called Drew Jarvis who worked on the sports desk, and he knew I was a mad keen football fan. And as the run started to build, he started to say, well, can you cover this game and can you help me with this? And it was just great fun being part of that. And that sort of snowballed as the run went on, to the point where I was, I suppose, a vital part of the Derbyshire Times team, making the trek across the Pennines for this game at Old Trafford on my 23rd birthday, almost 24 years to the day.
Amazing.
And I had glandular fever as well. Oh. So it all sort of merges into this lovely hazy memory.
Well, Jonathan, I mean, as David said there, he was on the news team and was asked to cover it, because this story of Chesterfield reaching the semi-final, it almost sort of transcended football in this country for that short period, because no third tier side has ever reached an FA Cup final, and they were so close.
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably got as close as any third tier side ever had done. I mean, Plymouth had got there, I think, as a third tier side in 84, got to the semi and had lost to Watford. I think Millwall had got there in 37, had lost to Sunderland. But a third-tier side getting that far was an incredible achievement. And the odd thing is that in their quarter-final, they played another third-tier side. They beat Wrexham. So once that draw had been made, there's always going to be a third-tier side there. And the other thing about this game, but I mean, certainly I felt, I don't know if you felt it as well, but as a Sunderland fan, I desperately wanted Middlesbrough to win this because Middlesbrough were involved in every competition this season, and they were scrapping with Sunderland against relegation from a Premier League. So my thinking was, keep them involved in as many things as possible, and we might finish above them.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't really say this, Jonathan, but my main rivalry as a football fan growing up was Middlesbrough, because I grew up 5 miles from Middlesbrough. So all my friends were Middlesbrough fans, and there was an intense rivalry whenever we played them. I remember going to a pre-season game once at Ayresome Park, and I stood in the Old Gate with some Middlesbrough mates watching Sunderland, and it was the sort of Lee Howie up front era, if that dates it for you, Jonathan.
They were dark days.
Well, yeah, I think we got a pasting. And all my mates were around me. There was a pitch invasion. It all kicked off. It was a pre-season friendly, and my mates stood around me shouting, "Can you run? Can you run? Can you run?" to all the Sunderland fans. And I'm standing there going, well, I don't know where this is going to go after the game. I'm not sure how I'm going to get home in one piece. So yes, Middlesbrough was the big rivalry, but the glandular fever bit of this story is significant because I actually was sent home from the paper for, I think, 6 weeks or something like that. So I was sent back to North Yorkshire, Teesside, and as this run sort of went on, I have a very blurry memory of the Forest game. I don't think I was in Chesterfield at the time of that one. That was the 5th round. But I got in touch with the paper and said, look, why don't we do a pull-out and I'll do the Middlesbrough angle on this. So I went to the Riverside then, they'd moved by then, and did sort of pen picks on all these amazing players that Chesterfield are going to be coming up against, and managed to do a few interviews and stuff down there. I've actually got it somewhere. I was having a dig around looking for it for my boy the other day. I couldn't find it. So yeah, I was bringing the Middlesbrough angle, and actually in the press box at Old Trafford, I remember I had friends in the industry. A big mate of mine I used to play cricket with, who was a big Middlesbrough fan, and I was jumping up and down in the press box because Middlesbrough were losing, and this team that I'd sort of growing in association with, Chesterfield, were doing this extraordinary thing.
We should say, by the way, anybody who's wondering, Sunderland did finish above Middlesbrough in the league that year.
And we both went down.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather have their team than ours.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other extraordinary thing about this game is the Middlesbrough side of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their growth, the fact that 10 years earlier they'd been on the brink of bankruptcy, they'd been locked out of their ground, and there they are moving into what at the time felt like a state-of-the-art new stadium. I mean, the Riverside was the first of the new wave of stadiums. In fact, I think that season in the Premier League, or Premiership as it was then, theirs was the newest stadium, and Selhurst Park was the second newest, built in 1927.
Wow.
Flipping.
So, they really felt like they were on the brink of something new and something big, and Steve Gibson coming as chairman. But it wasn't just the players they had. It wasn't just the fact that they got Ravanelli and Janino and Emerson. It was they were being linked with unbelievable players. I mean, Paul Ince, I think, was quite strongly linked. Batistuta was linked. And if they had stayed up, I mean, maybe they wouldn't have got Batistuta, but they'd have got other big-name players. Even if Ravanelli had still left, he obviously had begun to fall out with people by the end of the season. But there was the money there and a potential there for Middlesbrough to become a serious force. And you always look back to that game just before Christmas when they didn't go to Blackburn, when they had the virus ran through the squad, and they decided not to go and ended up getting docked 3 points. And if they'd gone and lost anything up to 7-0, they'd have stayed up.
Yeah, I mean that season or that period in Middlesbrough's history is quite remarkable, as you say, and they were a very entertaining side to watch, David. They would score a lot of goals and they would concede a lot of goals, and this match was no exception.
Very entertaining, especially when they lost. 4-3, 5-3s, all this sort of stuff. But I really remember the 1986, the period you're talking about, Jonathan. That was from the local news. Tyne Tees News followed that story really closely. I remember the gates being locked.
Yeah, that's the famous image, isn't it? The slightly rusting gates with the padlock on.
Yeah, and the team that emerged from that, actually, I have affection for, because it was a great team put together of young kids who then under Bruce Rioch really flourished. Gosh, I'm sounding like a Middlesbrough fan now, aren't I? But I can still name most of that team actually from that period, and was dragged along to some games with friends in at that time, because I couldn't actually get to Sunderland without parental permission or parental lifts by that point. So I had a lot of affection for them, and then we sort of saw their sort of growth and expansion, as you say, under Steve Gibson, and then it became a bit of jealousy, I suppose, and you saw it being rubbed in your face that all these great stars. You talk about the ones they didn't have, but with Ravanelli, Juninho, Emerson, I mean, pretty much every position was either a foreign star or someone of exceptional talent. It's a bit of a mystery, really, how they managed to get themselves in such a mess, because they had such good cup form. Because I think this season they got to the League Cup final as well, didn't they?
That's right. They lost to Leicester in the League Cup final. Yeah,
yeah.
Which was a replay as well. I think. I think it was extra time in the replay when there was that. Was it Matt Elliott's header?
It was a late goal from Heskey, I think.
Was it Heskey? Okay.
Might have been. I forget now, but it was certainly a late equaliser from Leicester. But with Ravanelli, I mean, not to dwell too much on it, you can forget he won the Champions League with Juventus, and then it was very shortly after that Middlesbrough signed him. He was knocking around certainly in latter stages of the Champions League. It wasn't as if it was to finish his career as a 35-year-old.
He was. What was he, like late 20s at this point, or maybe very early 30s? But yeah, and I think maybe that was the problem, that the disconnect between players of Champions League pedigree and then decent local players, people like Steve Vickers or who else in that side, Robbie Mustoe. Perfectly good players, but clearly players who would never dream of playing in the Champions League. Maybe that disconnect meant they were less than some of their parts.
Well, the other thing they had that season was the goalkeeper, wasn't it, Jonathan? I'm not quite sure how it happened that Ben Roberts came to be their FA Cup goalkeeper, but I think he only played. I checked this earlier. I think he played 16 times for Middlesbrough, but he played the FA Cup semi-finals. He played the FA Cup final. I think he played the League Cup final as well. And then went on this sort of globe-trotting career that ended. I think he's now a coach at Brighton, I just read, as their goalkeeping coach. Went off and finished football quite early and did education and things like that. But if Schwartz had been in goal, I think this might have been a very different story on the day as well.
It might well have been.
And you're with the big name players. I mean, Juninho obviously fell in love with the area and was devastated by the relegation and everything. But Ravanelli clearly never settled. And I mean, Emerson had his long period, 6-8 weeks, something like that. And he'd gone back to Brazil, and that extraordinary interview with his wife. I don't know if you remember that, where she described
right. Yeah.
She described Teesside as a strange, dark place.
Oh yes, I do remember that.
Jonathan, would you disagree with her?
My mum's side of the family are from Teesside, so I'm not knocking Teesside.
Okay, fair enough.
Teesside's a fascinating place, actually. Yeah. It's still home, and I didn't appreciate it as much until I left it. And if you go 2 miles out of Middlesbrough south, you effectively you've got beautiful beaches, and you've got the North Yorkshire Moors, which is as stunning as anywhere in the country, really.
Yeah, to be fair, Jonathan, actually, you introduced me to some of the local sights and sounds and smells of Sunderland and on the coast, and I genuinely was quite impressed, I have to say. So I
took you to an oyster restaurant in Sunderland.
Yeah, well, that was lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It was about 28 degrees. It was the hottest day we've had in about 30 years.
Yeah, my mind.
I feel like we're going on a tangent here, but I'm going to have to say that the beaches in Sunderland are some of the most impressive beaches you'll get in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, don't really, tell honestly. People. I would keep them to ourselves.
Yeah.
Indeed. All right then, gentlemen, I suppose now's a good time to have a break. We'll be back in a moment, everybody, to talk about the match itself. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard. So we talked a bit about Middlesbrough there, gentlemen. What about Chesterfield themselves? They'd gone out in the first round of the League Cup, also went out in the first round of the Auto Windscreen Shield that season. So they weren't a cup side, David, I think it's fair to say.
That is fair to say, yeah.
Yeah, and they would finish 10th in the league as well. So it wasn't as if this was a side who were romping the third tier. They were almost playing as a second tier side, if you will, ostensibly at least. None of that's true. This really did come out of the blue.
I have a vague memory that they were better than their league position. I would say that, and I think the games, because they're involved in this this cup run so deep, I think the games ended up stacking up quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a couple of others called off for bad weather. So there was certainly a time when you felt that they were going to push on for promotion, and then of course they just ran out of steam towards the back end of the season. But it was unusual, and I do remember when I worked on the newspaper that it was quite fun when they beat Bury in the first round, because this was not a sort of a guarantee, and then getting Scarborough, which I think was quite a kind draw at home as well in round 2.
Well, you say the first round. There's none of this coming in the third round business. First round, that's where they started.
So
right?
November or whenever that was. It must be probably November, I think, is it? Mm-hmm. And then round 2, and then you're in the hat for round 3 and get Bristol City, and it wasn't the Bristol City of now. This was a different Bristol City then, but still, I think that was a home as well. And I think it was after that really the town started to get interested. Now I had where I lived in Chesterfield was actually at Saltergate. I lived in a road called Compton Street, which backed onto Saltergate, and had something in common with Bob Wilson, actually, the legendary Bob Wilson, because he used to watch games at Chesterfield as a kid or sort of as a teenager from his girlfriend's bedroom. And from my bedroom, I could see a third of the pitch. So I could see the far stand side, I could see the dugouts, and I could see sort of that third of the pitch. But if I climbed out of my window and onto my flat roof, then I could see pretty much the whole ground.
Amazing.
So my formative years as a reporter on the Derbyshire Times, I was regularly on my roof practicing commentary of Chesterfield matches, which was quite difficult given I didn't really know any of the players.
Pre-internet as well.
Yeah.
Oh, incredible. Well, I mean, they beat Bristol City in the third round. They beat Bolton away in the fourth round, and I think you mentioned the Forest in the
Well, that was the
round.
Kevin Davis game, the Bolton away.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So he scored a hat-trick in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And then it sort of his sort of reputation just went on another level then. He was known as a very talented player. I think he would normally play right wing, and wasn't this. I suppose he was quite well built, but he was a young kid, and he was tricky winger. And one of the goals he scored in that game, I think he ran most of the length of the opposition half to score. And really, it was after that his reputation really started to grow. I think the Forest game, actually, I was there, and I think I went behind the goal for that game. But that was a Premier League Forest side, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an impressive run up until that point, of course, because the only goals they had conceded were against Bolton away from home. There was 2-0 and 1-0, so they were quite solid in that tournament up until then. I mean, how important was John Duncan, the man from Dundee, in charge of the side of Chesterfield? Because he seemed quite a character in some of the interviews before and certainly after the FA Cup semi-final.
Really interesting guy, John, and very smart guy. I bumped into him at a dinner the year before normal. And he's actually still in the game, but he came out of management quite early. I think he works for the LMA around referees. So he was telling me he was on very much on the referee's side, and he was asking me about how we portray referees on Sky and things like that. And we got in quite involved, deep conversation about it all. But a really interesting guy, smart cookie, very pragmatic. I remember watching some of the league games, and then sort of growing this interest in his tactical side of things. I'm starting to sound a bit Jonathan now, but I remember, was it the Forest game? It might have been the Forest game or the Bristol City game. It probably was the Forest game when I remember noticing that they didn't make a tackle, Chesterfield. Did not make a tackle in the sort of until they got to the edge of their box. So that is what I guess we call now a very low block. And I remember speaking to him about it. We went bizarrely. I ended up going to an Indian restaurant with him and a couple of other journalists as a bit of a get to know you session. And he was really good company, as was Kevin Randall, his assistant, who very sadly is no longer with us. And he was talking about the fact that if we do that, if we make a tackle, say around the halfway line or even halfway into our own half, and we're not successful in that tackle, then we're a man down in our defence. So we don't do it. We don't engage until they get to the edge of our box, which was a tactic that served him very well. But it was pretty direct stuff. It was find Andy Morris, big fella up front if you can, and play off him. Had pace with Davis and a guy called John Howard, who I think played from the left largely, and they were the outstanding talents really in the team.
I mean, Jonathan, what did you think of Middlesbrough under Brian Robson in terms of their tactics and so on? I mean, we know the players that they had, but what about Robson himself as a manager?
I think at this stage we still sense him as being quite promising. I mean, and even his time at West Brom, there was a period when he looked like he might be a future England manager. But I sort of think that this mix of players was really, really hard to manage. That the expectations and the level, the difference between a Robbie Mustoe and a Juninho are vast in what you can do with them. I mean, I think the other thing about this Chesterfield side, a lot of the time when you see a team that goes on an unexpected cup run, you realise that 3 or 4 of those players go on to do great things later. That they've got a group of good young players together. You look at this team, and okay, you've got Kevin Davis, who obviously goes on to Southampton and Bolton and has a great career. You've got Mark Williams, who plays for Watford and Wimbledon, but not a name that. I mean, he's certainly not even the most famous Mark Williams, is he? He's not even the second most famous Mark Williams. He's not a snooker player, and he's not an actor. He's possibly.
He did marry Lindsay Dawn McKenzie.
There you go.
Oh, I mean, those are facts.
Quite famous.
Yeah. Okay. The third most famous Mark Williams that I can think of, and you got Sean Dyche, obviously. But apart from that, they're sort of. I mean, a lot of those players. When I was looking through them today, a lot of them played 200, 300 games for Chesterfield. They were. This was sort of their one moment, and I guess that's where these couple ones can be so special. They do just come out of nowhere.
But I think the 2 players you mentioned actually are integral to the story, and particularly Sean Dyche. I mean, John Duncan certainly had a quiet, calming influence, but Sean Dyche was the leader of this side. I think you could see it whenever you watch Chesterfield. He was the organiser at the back. He was the one you could hear speaking. He wasn't as hoarse then, incidentally. He sounded slightly different back then, but he was still very much the same character who would a bit of a school teacher. Speak to people who have played with him, and they would say he was always the noisy one in the dressing room, always organising, always cajoling. So I think that was a really integral part of this team.
Well, it's interesting that he took the penalty. I mean, I don't know if you know more details on this, but on the commentary they said it was his first goal for 4 years.
I think they didn't have a penalty taker.
Right.
And if you actually look at the extended footage of it, which I did the other day, you can actually see John Duncan on the sideline going Dyche from the sideline as soon as they win the penalty. So he's the man who's got to step up and take it. And I'm not sure he ever took one before that.
But it's still fascinating that the captain should be the man to say, "Look, I'll take this responsibility. I'll take this on myself." And then it's the most Sean Dyche penalty imaginable. I didn't have to watch it to know what he's going to do. He's going to smash it straight down the middle as Ben Roberts dived out the way.
Yeah, but I tell you though, it's interesting you talk about John Duncan's tactics, David, about this. As you said, nowadays people might call it a low block, because you could imagine someone like Dyche really wanting to get stuck in, and it showed you the discipline of his side that they kind of bought into doing that. Which, as I say, you could imagine him sort of leaping out of defence and putting in tackles and so on and so forth.
Well, I think he tried to do that a little bit, but unfortunately, in this occasion, he was up against Ravanelli.
Yes,
and Juninho. So
maybe he was on his heels a bit. Yeah, true enough. I found this interesting. Some quotes from some of the Chesterfield players who played that day at Old Trafford. The goalkeeper was Billy Mercer, and he said 2 days before the match, the team offered a tour of Old Trafford, but they all agreed that, look, we're not making up the numbers here, so they declined the offer. And they said, no, this idea that, we should just be so happy to be here. I mean, yes, of course, there were feelings of, my goodness, this is great. But they did try and kind of knuckle down and use the you could say patronising tone or defeatist tone of the press to motivate them in this game.
Do you know what, Marcus? That's not true.
Is it not?
No. And I've seen the quotes from Billy Mercer. Billy Mercer was injured in the build up to the game, so he was back at Chesterfield, I think, having his. He had some rib problem. I think he'd broken his ribs. So
you're going to tell me that he was giving tours at Old Trafford to make up for
every other player. I'm pretty sure every other player was on a tour, and even more than that, there was a camera from Yorkshire TV that filmed it, which you can see on YouTube. And they actually, Sean Dyche was talking about it because some guy that was there, I think, ran stadium tours. Obviously thought, this little lot wants a nice little guided tour, and ended up giving them an extensive tour of the stadium from like a Manchester United perspective. So this was Captain so-and-so, and he did this in 1933, and all this sort of stuff. and they felt extraordinarily patronised by the whole experience. So
clearly the memo didn't get to Billy Mercer.
Poor old Billy was left behind.
Well, the other thing with Billy Mercer is that he'd been at Hillsborough as a fan in '89. I think he was on Liverpool's books at the time, but wasn't in the squad. And he'd been in the upper tier of the Leppings Lane end.
Wow.
So, I mean, I don't know to what extent it would even occur to him, but his previous experience of a semi-final was as horrific as it gets.
True enough. I think it's I think though, David, what you're saying there is they probably went for the tour and they had a lovely old time. And Billy said, "How'd you get on?" "Oh yeah, no, we were just sat in the hotel room to do it." That's probably what it is. And I've come along and seen that interview with Billy Mercer and gone, "Oh well, that must be the story." So I'm glad you're here to correct Billy and myself, who would appear. So the game kicks off at Old Trafford, and Jonathan, it's a typical kind of, I suppose, FA Cup semi-final type of affair that you want. It's the weather is conducive for playing football. There's huge noise in the stadium, but the favourites, overwhelming favourites, were Middlesbrough for this game.
Oh, understandably so, and the way that first sort of half hour or so went, they completely lived up to that. And I guess maybe that's in part the low block that Chesterfield were playing, but even just watching the highlights, it feels like relentless Middlesbrough pressure. There's that Janino chance that he puts just over early on. Mikkel Beck hooks one just wide at the back post. So, the game could have been over in the first 20 minutes. And then really everything changes with what's a very good break from Chesterfield. The Dyche plays it forward quickly. Andy Morris sort of helps it around the corner out to Kevin Davis on that right-hand side. And he gets pulled back by Vladimir Kinder, who'd already been booked. And this is the clearest yellow card you'll ever see. And David Ellery quite rightly sends him off.
Yeah. Kinder looked surprised, David, at the yellow card, or the second yellow card. But I mean, it's funny you talk about the Kevin Davis being this sort of jinky winger. I mean, you see it in that footage where he outpaces him, and it's a clear sending off. I mean, it's just a professional foul.
He was a strong boy as well, Kevin Davis. So he, as soon as he got in front of him, there was no way that he was going to haul him back, I think. He's probably a bit surprised by that. But that sort of, I remember, raised the decibel level in the stadium, because this is, as you say, this is not an ordinary state of affairs. This is Old Trafford, I think, before renovation, so 50,000, I think, and 25,000 of them were Chesterfield. And to put that in context, the average gate was probably 5,000 at Chesterfield. So, it was literally half the town that were there. And so people who didn't have any faint interest but just lived there were going. So this was a most extraordinary atmosphere, that sort of raucous, very much an FA Cup semi-final feeling, not like a Premier League match that might be a little bit subdued. So when that red card happened, I think there was just a realisation that, yes, he had been under the cosh for the first however long in the game, but there's an opportunity here.
Yeah, I mean, it's mildly similar, if you'll indulge me for a moment, chaps, when Fulham were playing Juventus at Craven Cottage and they won that game 4-1. And people can forget that Cannavaro was sent off in the first half of that game. But when that happens, you go, hang on a minute here. Still a big job on their hands, of course. But suddenly the realisation is, hang on, we're still 0-0. They haven't scored, and they're down to 10 men. I don't think much happened for the rest of that half off the top of my head. It may be a little bit more Middlesbrough pressure, but really this game just came alive in the second half, and we were treated to the first goal after 54 minutes with was it Andy Morris, David, who probably won't score an easier goal in his whole career.
He was a real character, a real figurehead for the team as well, and actually on the back of this, I think it was, he started writing a newspaper column for the Derbyshire Times every week, 50 quid a week job. And it needed a bit of work when it came in from Andy, but bless him. But he had some lovely ideas and was a real hero to the Chesterfield fans. And this was about his distance, I think, probably 2 or 3 yards. That's where he was. If you look at Dominic Calvert-Lewin this season, he's scoring his goals from in that sort of area. And that suited Andy just fine. But let's think about this. So the ball came in and Kevin Davis sort of hooked it on, didn't he? And Ben Roberts sort of couldn't keep it out, and it just trickled into Andy's path. And it was also probably, think about a third tier side playing an FA Cup semi-final. I think before or since there would never be a cooler celebration.
Yes,
in an FA Cup semi-final either. He just walked off, didn't he?
Yeah.
there was no, I don't think Bailey raised an arm. He was just,
He seemed to have a little chat with the Chester fans, as if to say, "Yeah, don't worry, I was going to do that. That's easy peasy, 1-0, all this sort of stuff." And then his teammates came over. But I mean, that was, I think, the Chesterfield fans behind the goal and the vast majority of the country was trying to suck that ball into the goal for them, because they had overwhelming, support from neutrals, as you'd expect, Jonathan.
And it's one of those great, as a fan, one of those great goals, because for a second, but it feels like much longer than a second. That there's no way it can't be a goal. So from a moment, Kevin Davies is stretching slightly. I think it's Howard's ball in. Davies is stretching slightly, so it doesn't get a full contact on it. But Roberts pushes it out, and you can see the whole thing. The ball just rolling into Morris's path. The fact he's onside. The fact that basically as long as he touches it, it's going to go in. There's no way he can miss that. And so you hear there's almost a two-stage cheer. There's the cheer as people realise this must be a goal, and then the cheer of yes, this is a goal. So it's a bit like, I don't want to always bring it back to Sunderland, but it is a bit like G's goal against Manchester City on New Year's Day, when he sort of bundles round. Who is it? Is it Joe Hart?
Probably Joe Hart. Yeah,
goes round Joe Hart, and suddenly it's the last minute. It's injury time, and he's 3 yards out with the whole goal. And you think, even a Sunderland striker can't miss this. And so you knew that Morris was going to score. And I think as fans, they're the goals you most appreciate, because you can sort of appreciate them twice.
Yeah, absolutely. And 1-0 went to 2-0 sort of fairly quickly, David, only 6 minutes later. And as I'm saying this, my memory fails me.
This is the penalty, wasn't it? Yeah.
It wasn't Davis that won it, was it?
No, it was Morris, and that's the surprising element to it, really.
Yes, that's right.
Because he gets played through, and you're thinking, well, the defender's going to just nip in front of him and take the ball away. But somehow Andy Morris finds this other extra gear, which I wasn't sure that he had, and then performs this lovely little pirouette over Ben Roberts. That again, you don't know where he's pulled that one from. Watching a lot of Sky Sports probably and Match the Day, and and then it's bizarre territory of penalty.
Yeah, I mean, it was, the goalkeeper seemed quite surprised by the penalty decision, Jonathan. Did you agree with David Ellery's decision?
I mean, the only question is, should it have been a red card? No, I think it probably should have been. I was trying
to
desperately
going away
remember.
From goal slightly.
Oh, he's 8 yards out.
Yeah. All I'm saying, it's not the worst decision Ellery made that day.
Well, I sort of...
It's in the top 5.
Well, I was just trying to remember if there'd been any sort of change to the last man legislation, but that's long before the double jeopardy law, and it's a really clumsy foul. I think it probably should have been a second red card. I mean, maybe the fact that Middlesbrough were already down to 10, Ellery didn't want to send off another one. I don't think it was cynical.
If he had, yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's
2-0. That's game over then, isn't it? Yeah.
2-0, and I mean Middlesbrough had already brought on one sub, hadn't they? They brought on Blackmore for Mikkel Beck, so they had one sub left, so they could have brought a keeper on. But I don't know if Schwarzer was on the bench, whether they could have brought Schwarzer on.
No, I think he was cup tied.
Ah, right, okay. So a third choice keeper coming in, but just 9 men obviously would have been much harder to get back into the game. But anyway, then Dyche smashes his penalty in. It's 2-0 with half an hour to go.
But again, David, another sort of fairly cool, I mean, a bit more passionate celebration, but Dyche didn't go crazy, as you diving into the fans or anything like that. Very different to that third goal, of course, which we'll get to in a minute. So there seemed to be I don't know, I don't want to read into it too much, but there was a concentration level there still with the Chesterfield
Definitely,
players.
Yeah. He's the leader, and he'll be thinking, heads on, lads. 2-0 up with, what was it, half an hour to go, something like that. And probably then the emotion of the occasion became the concentration of the football match, and we can't lose this now from 2-0. They would have realised that with a man advantage as well. This is ours to lose. So probably that little 2-0, that probably changes.
Yeah, that's the game management, isn't it, Jonathan? That from inexperienced players, you see how these things go, and 4 minutes later, and only 4 minutes later, it's really what they didn't want. Ravanelli kind of sort of bundles one in to make it 2-1, and you see the lift that it gives the Middlesbrough fans, and you think, oh, hang on, there's still a lot to play for here. Yeah,
but I mean, I'm not really sure what you should do. I don't know what the right thing to do is, because if they had just dropped off, I mean, they were playing very deep anyway. If they'd sort of abandoned any notions of trying to hit them on the counter? Do you just invite waves and waves and waves of pressure that when you've got players like Juninho and Ravanelli against you, inevitably that will produce goals? I think probably you do still have to offer something of a threat, but it is slightly odd that they do. It's not quite a counter-attack, but it is sort of a break that I think Juninho bursts forward and then lays in Clayton Blackmore down the left, who's got loads of space to put in the cross for Ravanelli. And you sort of think, could they have protected that a bit more? But I think it's very easy to say in hindsight, because what then happens, of course, is they should have got the third.
Well, yeah.
That by carrying on attacking, they actually create the opportunity. They actually score the goal that should have put them through. With Howard's shot, turns in the box, hits the shot, hits the bar, bounces down, comes out. And the thing I can't work out about that is the linesman does flag.
He runs back to the halfway line.
But I can't work out what he's... Ellery seems to think he must be flagging for an offside or a push or something, but there's nothing he could have been flagging for there other than the goal.
Well, I mean, it was a strange one, David. I mean, people saying the linesman ran back as if he was running back to the halfway line to signal the goal, but then Ellery overrules that. If indeed that's what the linesman was doing and didn't give the goal, it was mayhem for a sort of few moments in that.
Was there an element on his position as well? Was he actually on the line, the linesman, or was he further up the pitch?
No, he's slightly further up the pitch because he was level with the last man, so he's
right.
8 yards maybe from the line.
So he's guessing anyway, isn't he?
So up to a point, but he still has the. I'm assuming that. Howard, I think, has said his view was blocked by Roberts. He couldn't quite see. So he goes for the rebound. I think it's Jamie Hewitt who celebrates. I think he's the only one who celebrates. And Ellery is sort of to the left of the box. I don't know if it was a player in his way. But his linesman's not in a perfect position. But I still think he's probably in a not too bad position. 8 yards off the line, you can probably still... In the same way the cricket umpires now don't stand level with the popping crease but stand level with the stumps because of where fielders tend to stand. And you sort of think the angle is shallow enough that you still get a better view of that than... So, I think I don't know, I think the linesman probably is the one who should be making that call.
Yeah.
But that was the great "we was robbed" moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was the generated so much copy after that, the days after that, and John Howard, I did see, I had a Google of him recently, and he said that he bumped into David Ellery at a game soon afterwards, or years afterwards, probably more likely, and David Ellery had actually apologised. He'd introduced himself, said I scored the goal at Old Trafford, and David Ellery had apologised for it, admitted he got it wrong, apparently. If David Ellery had ever admitted that he got something wrong, then I'd like to be there to hear it.
It's very much an unofficial line from David Ellery.
Yes.
But again, go back again. Looking at this match, that sort of 15, 16 minute period when Chesterfield go 1-up to the penalty that Middlesbrough get. This is why this is, for my money, one of the great FA Cup games. That period in the game. Seldom do you get such drama and such excitement in a game of football, David.
I was just thinking, can you imagine what it would be like? I don't know if either of you were old enough or interested enough to be watching it, live on television at the time.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
It must have been just an extraordinary experience because I suppose, as we said before, everybody was rooting for Chesterfield as the underdog. And then to live all these key moments with them, from the red card to getting 2-0 up, and then being pegged back, and you think, oh no, that's going to happen, and then this moment where you think finally they're going to seal the victory, and then for that to be snatched away, I suppose then you're thinking, oh well, now it's the inevitable is going to happen, and of course it did. Yeah,
the way the penalty is won, Jonathan, Juninho scampers down the right and Sean Dyche is coming across and looking at the highlights back, I remember thinking to myself, was there contact, was there not? The referee was always going to give that one.
There's definitely contact.
It's contact,
Contact. It was a wrestling move.
Yeah.
Again, if you were told there's a penalty in this game and one of the players is Juninho and one of the players is Sean Dyche, just picture that. That's what happened.
A meeting of bodies,
but what I liked about it, having watched the highlights back, was the protest from Dyche You see that same protest every single week in the Premier League, in the same body language, the same gesticulation. It's brilliant. It's
I think he's still he's protesting still after the penalty's been put in.
Yes,
and they're putting the ball back on the centre circle. I mean, it wasn't a convincing penalty from Hignett. The goalkeeper kind of got a bit something on it, but it was 2-2 and again, one can forget that Middlesbrough were down to 10 men because you think, oh well, this is obviously a foregone conclusion now. The better side, the Premier League or Premiership side has equalised, but they were still down to 10, and it would go into extra time. But the game just sort of kept going on and on. David, I mean, what was the feeling among? Well, I suppose were you in the press box?
Yes, I was watching in the press box, and I think it was. Can we get a replay at this point?
Right. Okay.
No, very much that. Can Chesterfield take this to another match at least? Because I think any hope of Chesterfield scoring again at that point had probably disintegrated, and it was really a case of, everyone was exhausted watching it, and I think you could see the players were pretty much on their last legs.
Yeah, and we're going to extra time, Jonathan, and Middlesbrough get their chance. What was it? 5 minutes into the second half of extra time, when there's a bit of a goalmouth scramble, the ball smashed against the bar, and Fester picks up the ball. And to be fair to him, not the archetypal defender finish where he smashes it into the roof of the net. Well, I suppose you could say actually it was as if he was trying to clear the ball, but it was a great finish nonetheless.
Well, and the other odd thing about that is I think it's Steve Vickers who hits the bar as well. It's Ravanelli. I mean, Ravanelli assists for Steve Vickers. That doesn't make any sense on any level.
That's why it didn't happen.
And then, and as the ball comes off the bar, you got Juninho attempting a diving header.
Yes,
but his legs have his weight's in completely the wrong place. It's like the most pathetic dive as he fails to get there. But it falls for Fester who smashes it in. And at that point, I guess you think, well, well done, Chesterfield. You've had your fun, and it's all over.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it felt like watching it, and the way Middlesbrough celebrated, it's kind of like, they're off. We can't forget that Middlesbrough, I don't think, had ever been in an FA Cup final either. So, unfortunately for them, any kind of romance or fairy tale was very much taken from them by Chesterfield. But on the day, they'd have to wait because 9 minutes later, David, the ball gets sort of thumped into the box, and Jamie Hewitt beautifully guides his header into the corner to make it 3-3, and it's then absolute pandemonium. I mean, what was it like for you in the press box when that goal?
Yeah, pandemonium.
Yeah.
Desks and papers going everywhere. Extraordinary. It was a really deep cross, wasn't it? I think it was Beaumont that crossed it, and Beaumont had been the guy that scored the only goal against Wrexham in the quarterfinal to get them there. And very much, I would have, off the top of my head a little bit, very much a jobbing sort of lower league footballer, bit nippy. I think he went on to be a teacher, but hits this really deep cross. And funny enough, 2 years earlier, Chesterfield had been in the playoff final there and won to get into League One, and they scored a very similar goal to this one at Wembley to get them promotion. And there's Jamie Hewitt, who I don't remember him having a shot before, was suddenly appeared at the back post and leapt and got this. And I think he's probably one of the only lads from Chesterfield in the team as well. There might have been 2 or 3, but he was one of them. So it was a really lovely moment for him. And, this awful... If Andy Morris's celebration was cool, then his was not by any stretch. And there's this mass pylon, in front of the fans. Was it the Chesterfield fans?
I think it might be in the middle... Oh, I think it was at the Middlesbrough end, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was at the Middlesbrough end because
was it the Middlesbrough end?
But Dyche penalties in front of the Chesterfield fans, and this is at the other end. So
yeah,
I'm confused by the extra time. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, this amazing celebration, and in the middle of it, you see John Duncan on the sideline. The camera sort of cuts to him, and his glasses get smashed off his face. And I remember we did a follow-up story with Specsavers in the town who gave him free glasses for the rest of the season or whatever it was. Classic local paper story. But he's trying to get orders on at that point, although what he's saying to them, I don't know, because they were so deep, defensively at the other end anyway. It was a miracle that they managed to do this with their sort of the final dregs of energy that they had.
Yeah, I mean, it shows you, doesn't it, Jonathan? Just looking at the different celebrations, when Morris scores, very very cool celebration, as we say, which perhaps defied the feeling among the Chesterfield fans. Then Dyche scores again, but it's all about calm, stay focused on them. When this goal gets scored, it is like a winning goal. It's like, oh my goodness, we're saved.
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess fans who aren't used to that level of emotion
Yeah.
And I guess fans who aren't actually used to being in the ground. The fact that there's 25,000 there as opposed to a 5,000 average attendance. And it's something you see very, very rarely. And it is still the beautiful thing about the FA Cup, the total disbelief in the celebration. Not just people who are happy or relieved, genuinely cannot believe what's going on. And then, of course, reality strikes them. We lose the replay 3-0. But
that's the next chapter. Forget that one. But I think as football fans, you deal in moments, don't you?
Exactly, and that moment you would give a huge amount to have.
So for example, as a Sunderland fan, the Carabao Cup final 2014, I was quite happy at half-time. I could have left at half-time. Didn't care what happened next because Sunderland had scored a goal. I didn't expect
left after 10 minutes.
This amazing Barini goal, and then you at half-time you're thinking, well, we can't, can we? And then actually go, no, you can't. You're playing Manchester City, you can't.
Yeah.
And quite rightly, we couldn't. But for the Chesterfield fans and this greater population from Chesterfield who'd come to this game, and all the neutrals watching at home, you'd had the red card, you'd had the 1-0, the penalty award, the penalty goal, then all the pain of the goals you conceded, and you think it's dead and buried, and then you get this extra final moment as your such a Saturday afternoon or whatever this game was being played becomes an evening because you've been watching the game for so long as it drags into extra time. Just absolute ecstasy. One of the most incredible moments I've experienced in a football stadium.
I think we'll leave it on that note, David, because I couldn't possibly add to it. Thank you very much, though, for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this because, yes, it did remind me of one of the great FA Cup ties that I can remember watching. And as I said, I can't stress enough the excitement that this game threw up. And it was great that goal at the end went in because even though it wasn't a winning goal, it bloody well felt like one, certainly for those
absolutely. And we'll come back next week and do the replay, shall we?
There you go, absolutely.
Might not take as long, that one.
Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. For more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. But from myself, Jonathan and David, thanks very much. Jonathan and I will be back next week with another great game from the history of football. See you then.